Random story number 1. Tony and Anthony. Inspired by Rasha Komery's oil painting The Inside.
Colin sighed as he leaned against the wall across from the courthouse washroom. He checked the clock on his smartphone for the third time in as many minutes. Although he had some time to spare, he was slightly annoyed. Whoever was in that washroom was taking up that spare time. With every minute that ticked by, Colin got dangerously closer to feeling rushed. He hated feeling rushed. Finally, the door opened. An older gentleman dressed in a gray business suit with a belly worthy of a Santa Claus costume exited the washroom. Colin watched the man discreetly out of the corner of his eye as he walked down the hall and disappeared around the corner. After glancing in both directions to confirm that he was alone in the hall, Colin swiftly pushed the doors of the washroom open. Unlike the renovated washrooms in the busier parts of the courthouse, the wall paint in this one was faded. One of the bulbs flickered on and off, making the dull beige and green color of the walls seem drearier. However, the last thing on Colin's mind was courthouse washroom decor. He quickly checked the 2 stalls to make sure they were empty. He went back to the door and pulled out a metal device that was just big enough to clamp onto the door handle. With that in place, no one could open the door, not even with a key. After he locked the clamp onto the door handle, he moved to the sink and set his briefcase on top of it. Inside were various types of papers, folders, and your typical lawyerly accessories. Colin took out a pen from the inside of his suit jacket and lifted up some of the papers to reveal the leather lining of the case. He uncapped the pen with his teeth and used the tip to press a tiny button that was hidden in one of the corners. As soon as he released it, the bottom of the case sprang open like a jack-in-the-box lid to reveal a hidden compartment. In the compartment were various types of wires, tubes, a motherboard, a small computer screen, a small keyboard, and 2 glass containers, each containing a different liquid, one blue, the other red. His briefcase was really a bomb. But the briefcase wasn't the only deceiving thing about him. Colin wasn't his real name either. It was just the name he was using for this particular mission. Last month, his name was James. A couple months before that, he was Vladimir. The simple truth was, he was a hired hitman at the courthouse to collect another payday. His target, the defendant in an armed robbery trial. His client, the biggest mob boss in the city. The reason? He didn't know. In this line of work, the less he knew, the better it was for him. However, he had been around these shady individuals long enough to get a pretty good idea about what was going on. Most likely, the guy just knew too much. The boss couldn't risk him giving up information, so he had to go. Regardless, he couldn't care less about the motives. All he cared about was completing his mission flawlessly and getting paid. To get the job done, he needed to reprogram the bomb. He wanted to set it off remotely. Since he had access to the security cameras, he could wait for the perfect time to detonate it. The sound of rapid keyboard clicks echoed throughout the washroom as he edited his code for the bomb's detonation.
Tony!
Yelled someone with a booming voice. In one fluid motion, he turned around, pulled out the gun he had tucked in his back of his pocket, and pointed it at the door. Nobody was there. How could there be? He had already checked the stalls and locked the door. However, the most disturbing question was,
Who the hell knows my real name?
He hadn't been called Tony since his days in the Marines. Feeling unsure of himself, he went to the stalls and kicked each door open, pointing his gun just in case anyone popped out. Of course, both were empty. He glanced at the ceiling to make sure nothing was up there. Just as he thought, he was all alone. He cautiously tucked his gun into the back of his pants and returned to the briefcase bomb. As he started working again, he glanced at the mirror in front of him.
Come on, Tony. It's me, Anthony. You should be used to this by now.
Just like any reflection, the one Tony was looking at seemed identical to him. But the man in the mirror was a vastly different person. He was the Tony before the Marines, before the horrific sights, and before the unspeakable acts of violence. He was the Tony that his mother affectionately called by his given name, Anthony. A happier Tony that cared about life and looked forward to the future. He was the Tony that couldn't handle the realities of today and had escaped to the deepest corner of his mind. Tony just rolled his eyes and chuckled.
Oh, Anthony, you had me thinking I was going crazy for a second. If you use that thing, there'll be no doubt just how crazy you are. Calm down, Anthony. Giving advice is the last thing you want to do. You know that. It's been my advice that has kept you alive and out of jail since you started doing this type of work. Look at you, trying to take the credit. You remember that if you had taken my advice in the first place, I wouldn't be on this side of the mirror, don't you?
There was nothing much Anthony could say about that. Tony was right. Anthony grew up as an outgoing, popular kind of guy. Tony was just a persona he created to use when he played football. He was much more aggressive, reckless, and determined to win at all costs when he got into his Tony character on the football field. When Anthony joined the Marines and experienced the horrors of warfare, pretending to be Tony helped him get through the dangerous and horrific situations he faced. It wasn't until one particular mission that everything changed. Anthony had led 4 other soldiers to clear houses of enemy combatants and to free civilians who had been taken hostage.
Whoa, wait.
He and his team entered a room where an old, sick man was wrapped in blankets and swaying in a rocking chair, coughing violently. A voice inside Anthony's head had screamed,
Shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him. Shoot him.
Anthony ignored it. He didn't see a threat. Instead, he ordered one of his men to go and help the sick man, while the rest of them cleared the remaining rooms. They walked past the man to a door behind him. Anthony was just steps away from the door when they heard a loud beeping sound. Then suddenly, three of Anthony's men didn't make it out of that room. Another had severe injuries and could never walk again. Miraculously, Anthony only suffered minor cuts from shrapnel and a throbbing recurrent headache. Although he was back in action after only a few weeks in the hospital, he was never the same. Anthony's inner turmoil turned outwards. Every time he saw his reflection, there was Tony. It didn't matter if it were a mirror, a puddle of water, a piece of glass. Tony would always be in the reflection giving Anthony advice. Sometimes Anthony would take it, sometimes he wouldn't. Regardless, Tony would have something to say about the results of Anthony's decision next time Anthony saw him in his reflection. Things got worse after Anthony left the Marines. His headaches became more severe, he couldn't find work, his relationships fell apart, and government help was hard to come by. Much to his mother's dismay, he moved to the city to start all over. That didn't help either. Eventually, the money his mother gave him ran out, and he was forced to live on the streets. He ended up living homeless for 3 days. The arguments between Tony and Anthony intensified during that stretch. Tony begged and pleaded with Anthony to get them out of their situation, but Anthony just couldn't figure out how. It wasn't until day 3 that Tony decided to take matters into his own hands. For the first time, Anthony relented. Completely.
Yeah, he won the last game. Oh, really? Yeah, they might make it to the Final Four. That is so cool.
I can't do this anymore. We need to go. Where are we gonna go, Tony? Where are we gonna go? It doesn't matter. We just have to leave. Leave here. I can't sit here all day watching these people walk by, looking at us like we're some scum. Just get up and go. I can't go back to Mom. She'll be so disappointed. We were supposed to get help. They were supposed to help us, and they were supposed to help us. I just don't know. Shut up. Get up right now on your 2 feet and just leave. But where? It doesn't matter. There has to be something better, something more. Forget it. If you won't do something about it, I will. Tony, sit back down. No. I'm in charge now.
Tony talked to a friend who was involved in a gang and found work as an enforcer. Simple jobs quickly escalated into committing brutal acts of violence on rival gang members. Once his reputation was established, Tony quickly moved up the criminal rankings by taking on bigger and more lucrative jobs. Throughout his rise, he would see Anthony in his reflections. Anthony tried to give him advice that would steer him away from crime, or at least show some compassion towards his victims. Sometimes Tony took his advice, sometimes he didn't. Now, in that courthouse washroom, Anthony was trying to bestow some more advice.
Tony, a bomb? Are you serious? You don't think that's just a little excessive? You just need to get one guy. This is the easiest way to do it. I don't even have to be in the courthouse when this thing goes off. I could be at home, watching it happen live on the news while eating a slice of pizza.
Tony's plan was complex and took weeks to arrange. All of his hard work boiled down to this one final task. He just needed to switch this briefcase with the defense attorney's briefcase. The replacement briefcase was nearly a replica of the lawyer's briefcase. He wouldn't notice the difference. He'd take the briefcase into the courtroom, set it on the desk, the defendant would sit beside him, and then Tony would be one click away from the biggest payday of his life.
Tony, you have to find a different way. Why do all those innocent people need to die? There you go again, trying to be sympathetic. When are you going to get it through your head, Anthony? Nobody is innocent. What are you talking about? Not everyone in that room is a criminal.
Tony shook his head in frustration and pointed aggressively at the mirror.
You should know this better than either of us. None of the people in that courtroom or outside of it are innocent. Where were they when we were begging on the streets? Where were they when we couldn't sleep at night because of our headaches? We went over there and fought their war. We risked our lives every single minute, For what? For a free ride home and a pat on the back? Tony, listen to me. I know we've been screwed over by a lot of people. Killing everyone in that room with a bomb won't make things right. We should be helping people.
Oh, shut up with that.
No, you shut up and let me speak. When we got out of the Marines, all we wanted was someone to help us, and we didn't get that. Now look at us.
Exactly. Look at us.
Tony stepped away from the mirror. He opened up his suit jacket to show off, as if he was modeling.
We're looking good now, Anthony. We're making money and living the dream. We didn't need any of them. If it were up to you, we would have ended up like Malcolm. Just some crazy guy on the street. Or holding a gun to our head like Jimmy. But look at all the pain we've caused our family, friends, and even random people we don't know. It's not worth it, Tony. Think about Mom. You remember how much she wants us back at home? And how hurt she was when we left? You know from the last time we talked to her that she cries every night, praying for us to come home.
Tony paused to think about that phone call. It was painful to hear his mother pleading for him to come home. But he quickly shook his head free of the memory and got back to work. He was almost done.
Now multiply that pain by 100, maybe 200. All of the mothers of the people in the courtroom will have their children killed in such a horrific way. Then multiply that pain by 10,000 for all of their family and friends. All of that pain and sorrow? For what? Just to kill one guy and get your money?
All Tony had to do was press enter and the bomb would be armed. His finger hovered over it.
Don't do it, Tony. Let's just walk away from this. We got money to burn. We can help some of our buddies that made it home. We don't have to do this anymore. You don't just walk away from this, Anthony. Besides, I've worked way too hard to walk away from the pile of money that is waiting for us. If you don't walk away from this, then I'm done with you.
Tony raised his head and looked into the mirror. Rage boiled in him as he looked furiously into Anthony's eyes. He angrily grabbed the mirror and yanked it off the wall.
You think I need you? I don't need you. I don't need anybody. You need me just as much as I needed you, and you know it. Without me, you'd be some dumb, reckless thug who would have been dead by now.
Tony looked defiantly into the mirror. His muscles trembled from the anger.
Don't do it!
Tony screamed in frustration and raised the mirror high over his head. He looked down on the floor's white ceramic tiles where he could smash the mirror. After a few moments of intense temptation, he looked up into the mirror when Anthony was looking down on him.
Just put the mirror back and calm down.
Tony had been so tense, he had been holding his breath since he plucked the mirror off the wall. He exhaled, lowered the mirror, and gently tried to place it back into its spot. When that didn't work, he propped it up between the faucet and the wall. Tony focused on the bomb and let his finger hover over the enter button again.
Just walk away, Tony. Just walk away.
Tony looked up at Anthony, then back at the keyboard.
Damn it!
He yelled as he slammed the briefcase shut without pressing the button. He quickly pulled his gun out from the back of his pants and pulled out a silencer from the inside of his coat pocket.
All right, I'll compromise with you. No bomb. I'll just shoot the target. Agreed?
Tony twisted the silencer onto the gun barrel.
I guess so.
Tony shook his head in disbelief as he finished tightening the silencer.
You have just made my life so much more difficult. That was a perfect plan. Oh, stop your whining. You're a resourceful guy. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Oh, I better. If we end up in jail or shot by some cop, it will be all your fault.
Tony declared. He tucked the gun back into his pants. Tony fixed his tie and checked his suit to make sure he looked as pristine as he did when he walked into the washroom. When he was satisfied, he looked at the time on his phone. Then he realized that it didn't matter. His original plan had to be thrown out the window. He hated this feeling of uncertainty going into such a big mission. But in his heart, he knew Anthony was right. He figured something out. Tony grabbed his briefcase and walked back to the washroom door to remove the lock. Just before he opened the door, he looked back at the mirror. Anthony was looking back at him. Maybe one day, Anthony would make it back to this side of the mirror again. Just not today. Tony opened the door and left the washroom. The door closed slowly behind him.